What's important about trees? What do trees give us?
Shade.
Shade. And why is shade important?
Keeps the water cold.
Keeps the water cold. And the fish in the stream like cold water or hot water?
Cold.
Cold water. Very good. So how about, can anybody name any fish that are found in Bear Creek?
Goldfish.
Goldfish. They're not. They're having goldfish found. So that's a good answer. Again. Oh, good answer. So getting back, so that's a great answer. And at Salmon Watch, we focus more on what are native species. So who can tell me what a native species is? Either plant, animal, tree. What does that term mean?
It lives here.
Lives here. Very good. Lives here.
Wasn't brought in from somewhere else.
Adapted to our local conditions. It's hot. It's dry. So a lot of times they can survive. And it also generally, from a habitat perspective, it brings in, the pollinators we want, the animals we want. So, I mean, all of those things are important. What's an invasive species?
Humans.
Humans. We can be considered that. What does that term mean?
Doesn't belong.
Doesn't belong.
It's brought here.
Brought here. So can anybody name any invasive plant?
Blackberry.
Blackberry. Very good. We see a lot of blackberries. So getting back to fish, what are some native fish that are found here?
Yeah.
Salmon. I mean, I know there probably are some native bass. So salmon, again, we have a whole module that's dedicated to learning all about fish that Dick will be teaching about later. So, and if they've already gone to that, I will ask them, okay, well, can anybody name, what does the term anadromous mean? Or can anybody name a fish that's found in Bear Creek? So riparian areas, so we talked about trees. Why do we like trees? What's important about trees? What do they provide us? We talked about shade. What else do they provide? Leaf litter. They provide organic matter to the stream. You can see behind us there's a tree that's fallen over.
That's new.
Brand new. So it provides structure right now, of course, because Bear Creek is so dry it's not, but it creates habitat, it creates pools, it creates areas for fish to hide.
And so when you're talking about the life cycle, even in death, trees are a critical part of the habitat because this is how the stream gets structural complexity, which feeds into the aquatic ecosystem as well. So the knitting of the riparian terrestrial ecosystem with the aquatic ecosystem is very integrated. It's not discrete and separated. They work together.
And then what else do trees provide us? How do they stability. So what do trees have that hold soil in place?
Roots.
Roots, very good. So roots prevent erosion. So that's a good point I like to make. And then the shade. Kids always say they had oxygen too, which is great.
It's good to scope out your site and you can find like, oh look, there's some roots over there that are grabbing, the soil. Just so you can have something to look at.
Oh, we'll get to that too. So again, if you get held up on, what riparian areas are and you want, we have tools to help with specific definitions. We covered the shade, protecting stream banks, providing buffers, reducing erosion and pollution, the habitat and structures. So what we're going to do today from an activity perspective, generally I usually do 2 activities, and the most popular one is what we call our inventory activity or our scavenger hunt. So I can pass a few of these around so you can see. And so what I get to tell the kids is that they get to be scientists, they get to observe. So what they're doing is the same thing that we do as professionals, is essentially inventorying the riparian area, looking at what's there, looking at species, looking at habitat needs. So that's all part of the inventory piece, which is the scavenger hunt. So what we're looking for, there's a series of 11 questions. What we're going to do is walk around, see how many of these things we can find. So how many different kinds of evergreen trees are around in this area, and how many different kinds of deciduous trees. So normally at that point I'm like, does anybody tell me what the difference between an evergreen and deciduous trees, or give me an example of trees? So what's an evergreen tree? What makes it unique?
You can leave their needles all year long.
They keep their needles all year long. So if you think about, I always like, although certainly not native, is think about like if Christmas tree, term example of an evergreen. So deciduous tree, again, loses its leaves. So are there any invasive species in the riparian area? So we're going to look to identify all we can. If there are any berries, fruits, or seeds, looking for examples of human impacts, eroded stream banks. Is there a place where there are tree roots holding in the stream bank? Francis already pointed out one, but there are others. We're looking for different types of cover that help protect fish and predators, insect signs, and then evidence that birds occur in the area. And then also just general observations. Do we see any fish? Do we see any wildlife? Do we see any aquatic species? So we'll go around and we'll take a look at this area and do your inventory. Normally I will pre-screen an area to try to find different, making sure that I have some areas to point out, and we will walk. And since we have a restoration area, so we have some good examples of some trees that are planted. There's some good rock piles and stick piles and some good things to, we want the kids to get down, get dirty, roll over rocks, move trees, or move, stuff that's down just to see what's out there. So really explore. So this is the main activity that we do. So we'll go do that, and then I'll just run through the other activities really quickly.
They're good at learning new things, but you can't overload them. So maybe give them one riparian species, like say willows, are almost always by water. And they almost always have those skinny leaves and little skinny trunks and growing groups. So maybe if your site has willows, just teach them willows. So they get the idea of a riparian adapted tree, or it could be alders also, which always like more water. Yeah, that's one way to go. Is just give them one so they got something to take home, but don't try to get the whole thing.
That's a good point. Yeah. Normally, if I can get them, the difference between the evergreen or conifers and deciduous, I consider that to be, pretty good.
Some are starting there.
And then the other thing I usually do when I hit a site is I'll go around ahead of time, and if there are seeds, there are berries, I'll cherry pick a few things to have to show them. It's like, oh, hey, let's see if we can find this. Let's see if we can find this. So, and also talk about different restoration elements. Like here's a good spot for, Lazy Creek. We have a great example of an invasive species over here. Lots of blackberries. So talking about just maybe what, this area gets a lot of flow, so you can see a little bit of erosion in the banks, so you can get a lot of different invasive species. Blackberry is a great example. A lot of trees. So also talk a little bit about, again, this area we have restoration. So we have the site across the way, and then we also have some trees that are planted over here. We planted it when it was about a foot tall. It's now about 50 feet. So we planted it in, I think, 2003. Again, the idea is to get kids moving.
This was planted like 10 or 12 years ago?
Probably about 10 or 12 years.
So if you have 12-year-old kids, you can say, this was a restoration project. It happened around the year you were born, and this is one of the trees that planted it.
Right, so this would be like, well, does anyone know, what type of tree this is? Is it a, deciduous, or is it a conifer, evergreen? So hopefully they'll be able to get that incense cedar. So again, it just, whatever you think might really interest the kids. We have more conifers, we have deciduous, Oregon ash. All of these were planted. So that's one of my favorite trees, the alder there. We planted it when it was about a foot tall in 2003. So now it's at 30, 40 feet tall. So I think that's really cool. I get excited when I see things like that. Here we talk about, I mentioned invasives. We have another one right here. Anybody know what this stuff is?
English ivy.
English ivy. But we're looking for examples of fruits, nuts, and berries. So here you go. Here's something that is in bloom. So again, just getting the kids to, sometimes I'll, here we have tributaries and talking about naming of creeks. Again, those connections. So here along the Greenway, we have all our creeks named. So Lazy Creek. So sometimes I'll talk about the differences, in Bear Creek versus Lazy Creek in terms of size, in terms of flow. Again, just, your site's going to have a lot of different characteristics. This is very unique for whoever's doing riparian up at McGregor. Again, conditions are very different up there. So yeah, we already covered these, but of course, invasive species, more blackberry. Example of a native shrub, but also berries, snowberry. So, lots of good stuff. Snowberries are poisonous, so don't want kids to eat those. We also have other invasives. It's poison hemlock. We'll go on to that too. Sometimes, again, the restoration sites, like here, when we did our virtual sessions, we focused a lot on the restoration site because it kind of gave us a really small area where you could kind of get your hands dirty and see the individual species. Like I did give somebody the card for finding the plant. I think it was a ponderosa pine, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here's an example of it. Again, another conifer, ponderosa pine. Sometimes I'll talk about how you identify them. So, the ponderosa pine has the needles in clusters of 3. So again, getting into, all depending on the level of kids. Plenty to talk about. Cedar, big leaf maple, ash. So examples of insects. So here we got, I don't even know what kind of insect it is, but some sort of beetle.
Oh, that's a stink bug. It's
bug.
A true bug. And yeah. So if I know it's not a poisonous animal, I just pick them up. So true bugs have that X shape. They have a half a wing. And look, they look like beetles, but they don't. Beetles have a complete covering.
Cover number 8. It's the way it's worded. It's specific to fish, but I also, in an area like this, I like to talk about cover for, wildlife and rodents and insects. So we see rocks, we see the brush piles. So I'm not sure we'll find much, but a good place to find lots of insects and everything else is to turn over leaves and move sticks. And, kids don't really like doing that.
So. What about rattlesnakes here?
Not too much, but when we were out here in May, there was lots of good bugs. Some examples of human impact in the stream. And in an area like this, what I like to talk about is, since we're in a restoration area, humans are impacting the streams, but in both a positive and negative way. Here's some negative examples, but positive in that we're looking at restoring habitat, restoring natives, managing the invasive species. So again, it's talk about that. Here's some teasel, which is also this footleaf teasel is an invasive species. I'm going to try to get rid of that. Plenty of examples. In place, we saw a little bit of evidence of bank erosion on here from Lazy Creek. Right now I haven't seen any evidence of birds occurring in this area. Sometimes we find nests. You can hear. There you go. Until now, I didn't hear any, but yeah, that's always a good one because usually you can see them or hear them. Do we see any wildlife fish or aquatic species? I haven't seen any today. When I was down here in November doing a Salmon Watch class, there was a pair of otters that came up here and went in. So we do have, you never know what you might see. So yeah, anything, we remind, like Tara said, the kids, what do you see, what do you hear, what do you feel? All important in the, just getting your hands dirty and teaching about riparian areas. Anybody have any questions about the inventory part, the scavenger hunt? So this is the most popular and the main activity that's done. Generally, what you have time for.
How many species do you have of those ones you showed the ponderosa pine?
I think we have about a dozen or so.
Okay. Seems like a way to, if you want to do a little bit of ID, you could, instead of handing out the scavenger hunt to every pair, you could hand out one of the larger sheets and say, you're going to go find this one, and then do like a sharing it back to the group so they become the expert. So everyone learns at least one.